We're in the second week of a 5-week series called FOR, F-O-R, and it's based on the most recognizable "for" in the Bible, which is, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son." We've titled it this way because we're really at an important decision point as a congregation, as a church. We're about to turn 25 years old next year, and the decision point is this: are we going to apply the same kind of faith, the same kind of vision, the same kind of sacrifices for the next 25 years or more that were applied in the first 24 years getting us here? That's a decision point we have. Last week we looked at our mission in light of God's mission. God makes his mission our mission by giving us the ministry of reconciliation. His ministry is about reconciling us to him and to each other. And so he gives us the ministry and the message of reconciliation. We looked at that last week in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And he says, we, if we're followers of Christ, we are on assignment in this world to be ambassadors for Christ. God has called us to love the world. And so to love the world that he so loves. That's what he's called us to. Now today, we're going to look more closely at that love that compels us to love the world he so loves. And we're going to see that that love is not just a superficial emotion, but that love is sacrificial action. Not a superficial emotion, but sacrificial action. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave. God sacrificed for us, showing us what genuine love looks like. And then that shows us what the love that we're supposed to bring to the world, what that is supposed to look like in our lives. Now, a great illustration of that comes from something that I heard when I was a young dad and at a fathering conference. And Dave Simmons, who was a former NFL linebacker, told a story about his family motto. In their home, they had a family motto, which was love is sacrificial action. And it's a story about the day that his daughter applied that to her own life, adopted that motto into her own life. They were on their way to, it was a Saturday, and they were on their way to run some errands. He was running some errands in the mall. He took his kids along, Helen, who was 8 years old at the time, Brandon, who was 5 years old at the time. And he was hoping that in addition to running some of his errands, that they would give him enough time to just spend some time, looking at the tools at Sears. And so, but when they came up, they saw this big sign that said petting zoo, and the kids were like, petting zoo! They were really excited about it, and they begged, and so it was actually very convenient for him, give him more time to shop. So he flipped them each a quarter, and he went off to Sears, and he's walking down the aisles, and all of a sudden he looks back, and there's Helen behind him. He didn't know how long she'd been there, and he's like, what's the matter? And she said, Dad, it cost 50 cents to go into the petting zoo, and I gave Brandon my quarter. And he said, then he heard coming out of her mouth some of the most beautiful words that he'd ever heard, because she applied the family motto. She said, Dad, love is sacrificial action. He said, there's no kid that loves animals more than his daughter. And so he said, what he did next is not what you would expect. He finished looking at the tools. He went with Helen in tow. They went through running all their errands. They came back to the petting zoo, and they stood outside the petting zoo watching Brandon having the greatest time feeding the animals and petting the animals. And she stood there with her hands and her chin on the fence. And he said he had like 50 cents in his pocket that were burning a hole in his pocket. But he never offered it to her, and she never asked for it. And here's what he says. He says, love always pays a price. Love always costs something. Love is expensive. When you love, benefits accrue to another person's account. Love gives. It doesn't grab. Helen gave her quarter to Brandon and wanted to follow through with her lesson. She knew she had to taste the sacrifice. She wanted to experience that total family motto, which is love is sacrificial action. And so we come to John 3:16, and we read, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. And we're reminded of what love is. what God's love is about. And we're reminded as to what the love that we bring into the world on mission for God, what that is supposed to look like. Real love is not superficial emotion. Real love is sacrificial action. There's an incident from King David's life that illustrates this principle really well. God tells David to go and buy a threshing floor from this one man named Ornan and to sacrifice an animal there. And so he goes to this spot and he explains to Ornan what he's going to do. And Ornan looks and he says, here's the king. And he's got a message from God. He says, I'm going to give you the threshing floor. It's yours, free. And I'm going to give you the animal for the sacrifice, and I'm going to give you the wood for the sacrifice. And this is David's response. But King David said to Ornan, no, but I will buy them for the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing. David, like Helen, knew that he had to taste the sacrifice. My son, oldest son, Henry Michael, learned this when he was in middle school. After years of disrupting his younger brother's birthdays, he kind of made up for it in a big way when he was in middle school. All the Blockbusters in the country, remember those stores called Blockbuster? All of them in the country, and there were a lot of them, gave away a life-size Yoda when the new Star Wars movies came out. And he was the one that won. Everyone gave away one, and he was the one that won it. And his younger brother was a big Star Wars fan. He liked Star Wars, but his younger brother really loved Star Wars. And so he gave it to him for his birthday. It was a significant gift because this thing is really cool. Here's a picture of it there. My daughter-in-law just posted that the other day on Facebook. Didn't know I was going to be talking about this. But that's in his office now. And it is a really, really cool gift. It was a sacrificial gift. But not nearly the sacrifice that he was to soon find out, because he was talking to one of his closest friends who had called, and he told him what he had done, that he had given Yoda to his brother. And his friend says, "You're crazy." He says, "That thing is selling for $500 on eBay right now." So Henry Michael goes back there and says, "Hey, how about we sell it on eBay and split the money?" Aaron's like, "No way. No way. I love this thing." And he laid off. He realized he had given it as a gift, and he had to taste the sacrifice. And he was willing to taste the sacrifice, because real love is not a superficial emotion. Real love is sacrificial action. And you see this principle at work in the teaching of Jesus. There's a story in the Gospels where Jesus is at the temple, and he actually sits down to watch people give their offerings. He and the disciples are sitting there, and they're watching, and a lady comes up, a widow, and she gives 1 penny. 1 penny. And here's what Jesus says. "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." So Jesus sees this woman, and he doesn't see the penny, he sees the sacrifice. And seeing that sacrifice, he says, what this poor widow gave is greater than any other gift. That 1 penny is greater than all the other gifts that were given on that day. Love is sacrificial action. It costs something. There's a taste to that sacrifice. I love the story of a church some years ago who they were taking a collection for one of the families in their church. They didn't give away the name of the people that they were taking collection for, but they had a lot of kids, and they were both out of work, and they'd been out of work for a long time, and they just wanted to help. So they told the congregation, "Hey, we're going to take this offering." And there was this other family who was also going through a hard time. But they said, as a family, they said, we've got to do something. And so kids went. They didn't have any money to give, but the kids went among their toys and pulled out some toys. Parents gave some of their clothes, and they made a contribution. It made it a family thing. We're going to help this destitute family. Turns out they were the family that everybody was collecting for. There's a church in that the Apostle Paul talks about, another family. It's a church family, and they were going through a hard time. there was almost a famine. There was this really difficult financial time that was going on in the area of Macedonia, and the churches there contributed to a financial campaign that the Apostle Paul was running. Apostle Paul was on his way to Jerusalem, and while he was there, he was passing through all the churches that he had planted himself, and he had sent emissaries ahead with notes, and he had said, be ready when I come. We're going to take a collection, or already take a collection. I want you to take a collection. I'm going to take what you collect down to Jerusalem because the church in Jerusalem is going through a hard time. And this was such a big deal for Paul that he mentions it in 1 Corinthians. He mentions it in Romans. He talks about it at length in 2 Corinthians. It's mentioned in the book of Acts. He's on his way down there, even though it's been prophesied that when he gets to Jerusalem, he's going to be beaten and he's going to be taken into prison. But he goes anyways. He's willing to pay that price. He's willing to sacrifice in that way. So the churches in Macedonia, Paul tells the Corinthian Christians, he says, the churches in Macedonia, even though they're going through all this affliction, all this problem, they gave even out of their poverty, and they did so joyfully. And that's what it says here in this passage that I told you to turn to, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. He says to the Corinthians, he says, we want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches in Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints in Jerusalem. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. This church that was going through this hard time gave abundantly out of their poverty, but they did so joyfully, and they begged, Paul, let us participate, even though we don't have very much. Love is sacrificial action. We see this in this passage, that sacrificial action is not just sacrificial action. It's not like this dreary thing. So people say, well, when I love somebody and I give something to them that costs me something, it's not a sacrifice. That's right, but it is. But it can be a joyful sacrifice, and that's what it says in verse 2. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. It's the same way that Jesus' self-sacrifice is spoken of in Scripture. In Hebrews chapter 12, trying to encourage the Christians there who are going through a hard time, the author says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Okay, we got this tough race ahead of us. Put your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame. So God the Son goes to the cross. And we oftentimes focus on the physical pain that he experienced on the cross. And that was significant. But it's nothing compared to what he experienced even before he goes to the cross. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and God the Son prays to God the Father. And we just read, well, he prayed the same prayer 3 times. But you have to realize this is probably it is the first time in all of eternity past where God the Son turns to God the Father, and when he speaks to him, God doesn't speak back. God doesn't answer him. And that's the greatest sacrifice. But for the joy, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. There's joy in sacrifice, a deep joy of knowing that my life and what I'm doing matters to God and it matters to other people. Love is joyful sacrificial action. So today I want to talk to you just for a few moments about why I think every one of us who calls Five Oaks their home, you call this your home church, you're not checking us out, you're not a guest with us, you call this your church home, why I believe that every single one of us should make a sacrificial commitment to the For campaign. Why, like Dave Simmons' daughter Helen Simmons and my son Henry Michael with that Yoda gift, why you should taste the sacrifice of love. 4 reasons I want to look at really quickly. And the first one is because it's necessary so that we can extend or expand our capacity for local mission right here, our mission right here. In fact, without this campaign, we really can't expand our local mission. We can, but we shouldn't and we won't just buy the land and put it on our loan, just say we're just going to make payments on this. That will cut into our week in and week out ministry and our potential to be able to reach the people that are coming. So it would be counterproductive to do something like that. So we're buying 9.5 acres that come right along our land here, and that'll give us the opportunity to expand our capacity on this land that we own now. And that's why we're doing it. Now, we've talked about the estimated 20,000 people who are going to be moving in all around us, the houses that are going up, and over the next 10 to 15 years, as many as 20,000 people that are going to be moving in right around us. But we haven't talked as much about the over 100,000 people that are within a reasonable drive of Five Oaks. Within a reasonable drive of Five Oaks, but they have no church home. These are people that you work with. These are neighbors of yours. These are friends of yours, family members of yours. Within a reasonable drive, over 100,000 people that don't have a church home, don't know Christ, and are far from God. This makes it possible for us to continue to reach people for Christ. Without sacrificial giving, that means our people, just like every other building we've ever built here, without sacrificial giving of our people, meaning giving over and above what they're already giving, not just to the church, but everywhere they give, we really can't do this. But I want you to think about something. So much of what we do costs many of you nothing. But everything we do costs many of you something. Everything we do costs many of you something. And I want to be honest with you. Some of you who call this your church home, and you've called it your church home for a long time, haven't engaged in our mission. You come, but you haven't engaged in our mission. One of the ways that you engage in a mission, and it's not an or, either or thing, it's one of the ways that we engage in mission is by giving, according to Scripture. And one of the great things about a campaign like this is that it oftentimes is a first step for people to engage in our mission. There's something about campaigns that you just really focus on what it is that we're about, and for several weeks, and for some people, it's the first time they take some steps to do that. Now, Brian Berquist, who is our business administrator and the one who got the whole ball rolling with the land and then took it all the way to the point where we were able to sign all of that. Brian, last week we were standing out in the Commons between services, and he said, one of the great things about this campaign is that we're not getting anything substantial out of it, like a building. Hey, they're putting in a youth center or a new worship center or something like that. We're buying land. He says, one of the great things about that is that it puts the focus where it needs to be. It puts it on the heart. It puts it on our mission. And he is so right about that. Some people that are here at Call Five Oaks, their home, give. And many give sacrificially, but they don't give to their home church. And they say, because I've heard this before, you seem to have everything that you need. First of all, that's not true. That's like living at home and leaving your stuff on the ground and going, I'm not going to pick that up because I know somebody else will. It doesn't work that way. And it's not biblical. It's simply not biblical. That's the primary reason. It's not biblical to do that, to not support your home mission, your home church. Some of you, really, to really be honest with you and to have you ask a question, some of you are at the point where you need to ask yourself, am I treating the bride of Christ, the church, like a consumer product? I don't think anybody wants to do that. Nobody wants to take the bride of Christ, his church, that's how he describes his church, and treat it like something where I just take, but I never give. I come, my kids come, and I take, but I never give. And I'm not talking about some of you who are in one of those situations right now where there is no income coming in to speak of, and you're just going through a really difficult time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those of us who can pay our bills and those of us who, can go out for coffee and pay, the price of a coffee shop coffee. And we can buy a car. It might be a used car, but we can buy a car, and it's a pretty nice used car. We can pay the check for our kids for all their sports things, which, these days is about like paying for a college education, especially if you're in hockey. It's expensive stuff. The people who can write those checks But when it comes to their church, they don't engage, and they treat it like a consumer product. I don't believe that's where you want to be. You are the church. We make the mistake, everyone, all of us make the mistake of talking about going to church. Hey, let's meet over at the church. Okay, it's just the way we talk, but you know that this building is not the church is you. The church are the people. And I'm challenging you and I told you I was going to challenge you during this series. I'm challenging you to move from being a consumer to being a co-owner. From being someone who just takes to someone who also gives, who joins with us, engages in our mission. Here's the second reason why I think you should make a sacrificial commitment to this, is because it all comes from God and it's all used for God. In 1 Chronicles 29, King David initiates a financial campaign, a capital campaign, to raise money for the temple that the next generation is going to build. His son is the one who's going to build it. He knows he's not going to build it, but he raises the funds for it. And the temple goes on the same spot as that threshing floor. So if you read the story in 1 Chronicles 21 and you read the opening verses of chapter 22, what you read there is that the temple was going to be built right where that threshing floor was, where that sacrifice was made by David. And David, recognizing that he wanted to give as much as he possibly could to God, and he prayed this prayer in chapter 29. He says, everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us. Even this material we have gathered to build a temple to honor your holy name comes from you. It belongs to you. And so he's saying, none of what we have even belongs to us. Everything we have comes from God and belongs to God. So the question is, how much of what God gave you are you going to be able to use, or are you going to use for his purposes? Now, part of his purposes is supplying for your family. The Bible's really clear about that. That's your income. Part of it is to provide for your family. There's even scripture that say part of your income is to have fun, to enjoy. It says that in scripture. I mean, offerings in the Old Testament were parties. And in the New Testament, Paul says, those of you who are rich in this world, God has given you that to enjoy it. But don't forget, you get riches in heaven as you give more and more away. And so God has given us this so that we can give back to him. Part of that is to give outside of our own family. It's not just that he's given that. It's his. It belongs to him. You're a steward. It's not just about you, your family. It's to extend to his mission locally, in his churches, and all around the world. Why not use it? It's going to pass away. You can't take it with you. Why not give it for his purposes? A third reason sacrifice, that we ought to sacrifice, is because sacrifice honors God, but it also inspires people. David's capital campaign was wildly successful because it began with him making a sacrificial gift from his personal treasury. Then he went to the leaders of Israel and he said, I want you to consecrate your own hearts. And then I want you to give freely and willingly from that heart. And they gave abundantly. And here's what it says. It says, the people rejoiced over the offering, for they had given freely and wholeheartedly to the Lord, and King David was filled with joy. When people give of themselves, it inspires others. If you in your small groups, for example, and in your friendships are talking about what you're going to give, it inspires other people to give. I mean, you don't have to get specific about what you're going to give, but you talk about giving, it inspires other people to give. People start hearing your heart for God pounding, and it begins to get them thinking about and praying about how they can give as well. There's a lot of sacrifices that have gone into this congregation's history over the last 24 years. A lot of people are surprised to learn that we were started in 1989, but we didn't move into our own building for worship until 2002. Okay, 89. You know how long ago that was? Just think about what you wore back then. All right? That long ago. From 89 to 2002, for 13 years, we met in a number of locations, mostly schools, and that meant there were teams of people who set up and took down every single week for 13 years. That's hard work. That means if we were still in a situation like that, many of you would have gotten up this morning at around 6 in the morning to get everything, all the sound equipment and instruments and all that kind of stuff ready for our worship, all the children's stuff ready in the children's wing. Imagine setting everything up. We did that for 13 years. And then if you add Hudson, the people there did it for 4 years. Now, what might surprise you, so that's about 17 years of setup and takedown. Now, it might surprise you to know that we built the center part of this building in 1999. So we had bought the land in about 96, 97. Then in 99, we built the center part. You can see it from the outside, but it's over there. It's kind of a rectangular building. And we had an all-purpose room. And there were people that came to me with written down plans on paper and said, we can meet here. We can stop meeting at the school. It's expensive to meet at the school, $50,000 a year to use it for 4 hours on Sunday. And so we were like, they're like, we can do it. It's not a perfect building for this. We didn't build that center part for that. That wasn't our plan to move in right away. But we can do this. If we have enough services, we can do this. And, our leadership talked and we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we're not going to do it because it would impact our potential ministry. It would impact our potential ministry. We'd be full already. And for the next 3 years, we wouldn't grow. We wound up staying at the school. We set up and take down for another 3 years on top of that, and probably grew by another 200 or 300 people on a weekend during that period, reaching people who are looking for a home church and reaching people for Christ. When we finally finished, I forgot to show this last service. When we finally finished doing it, we gave this cup to the setup and takedown team. So it says setup and takedown recognition, September 22nd, 2002. And it says, if you set up, they will come. And a little corny, but very much appreciate it. I still have my cup. And I just want to, just for a moment, I'm not going to ask you to stand up or anything, but I am going to ask you to raise your hand. If you, either at Hudson or here, were at some point a part of that setup at takedown team, would you hold your hand up and just hold it up for just a moment, would you please? Oh, this service, yeah. All right, great. Thank you so much. This service had the most, so I'm guessing you guys are making up for lost sleep coming out here. All right, fourth. Sacrificing enables us to extend our global ministry reach. So when we do a campaign, we usually do some things outside of our local ministry to help others. By the end of 2013, so by the end of this year, this calendar year, Five Oaks will have supported 19 missionaries. We will have supported partially, I mean, not completely, but we will have helped support 19 missionary families that are serving all around the world. We'll have packed 500,000, 500,000 meals for hungry people. So we did last March. To be exact, 520,992 meals for hungry children around the world. We'll have filled 438 Thanksgiving bags in partnership with one of our partners, Union Gospel Mission, more than any other church in the Twin Cities. Donated 4,009 diapers to New Life Family Services. Filled 180 backpacks for Karen refugee children, and so much more. Our impact budget for this calendar year will have been money that we gave away, $192,000, almost $200,000. So we take offerings and then we partner with people outside of us. And then that doesn't count the $80,000 additional dollars outside of our impact budget that we had to raise for those meals. So we're talking about nearly $300,000 that have gone out to wonderful, worthy ministries that need help and partnering with them in ministry all around the world. And here's what I know, that many of you are like Lois and me. We more than tithe to our church, and then we give to ministries outside of our church. We have missionary families that we have given to for 20-some years, and other organizations and sponsoring kids and all of that. So we're talking about the impact that this congregation has outside of our own local mission. It's incredible what happens year in and year out. And because of the campaign, we're going to be able to do more. We're going to, with the Willow Creek Association, we're going to sponsor a summit location, a leadership summit location in a city that outside of the United States, in a city that is under-resourced and can't have it without the kind of help that we're going to be able to bring. And then we're going to send a team there to help pull that off. We're going to partner with our missionary partners in Haiti. by when we do next March, our Feed My Starving Children event, we'll fill a container, and then we're going to pay the extra money to send that container to our missionary partners, because that's how Feed My Starving Children works anyways. It works that they send it to missionaries who then distribute the food to hungry children. And so we are then helping them extend their ministry in the whole central plateau of Haiti. And we're also going to partner with a church that we work with in Jersey City where our youth go, and they have a wonderful program. We're going to do some things for our own local ministry potential, improving the set design in the children's area in the CLC, some things in the commons, and some staffing needs and office needs that we have as well. Now, in a few moments, we're going to continue our worship here and responding to God and how He's speaking to our hearts. But before we do that, I have a video story that I want to show you. Our campaign chair, Hector Dalton, we asked him to share a little bit of his story. So let's watch that video.
I'm Hector, and this is my story. Beth and I were high school sweethearts and went off to university, and right after university got married and moved to the little town of Hutchinson, Minnesota to start our married life together. When we moved to Hutchinson, we of course did not have a church, but yet we wanted to start tithing. And so we asked each other, well, where would we give this money? And realized that a high school friend of ours, Tom Orr, was going to be a missionary in Japan. And so we thought, what better way of starting off tithing by supporting Tom as he got started as a missionary in Japan. And in 1996, we found ourselves moving to Woodbury, Minnesota from Texas, and started to attend Five Oaks Church. When we moved back to Woodbury, of course, our kids were growing. Our first child was entering high school, and like many families, we were busy budgeting and figuring out how we would take and raise our family, including how we would cover costs like college. And the decision was made to do a campaign to build the worship center here on Radio Drive. And so we became involved in that campaign. And both Beth and I, during that campaign, both felt a tugging on our heart. And so we did a lot of praying about that and a lot of talking about that, and realized that, the financial plans that we had and the savings that we had for college and whatnot were really our plans. We really hadn't involved the Lord heavily in that. We had just gone through the mechanics of saving the money and putting things aside. And we just really felt called to, to step out in faith and to, pledge a significant amount to the campaign, which would mean dipping into, a good chunk of that savings. It was a big decision, and we were really, stepping out in faith in kind of two ways. One is that the Lord would hear our prayers and help us work through all the things financially on how we would still make things happen from a budget standpoint and cover all of those things, as well as that trust Him that He was really going to take and use Five Oaks in a big way to impact the community. And what we saw was that we indeed were able to take and manage things financially. Those were taken care of. And of course, you all know about Five Oaks and where it is now. And it wasn't too long after we moved into the worship center and started using it that there's obviously we were going to need to expand again because the ministry was so successful. So God blessed the ministry and as well as blessing us with His faithfulness. And not only did we see God's, faithfulness in what He was doing here with Five Oaks, but if I can close the loop and go all the way back to Tom Orr, the very first missionary that we supported right after we got married, little did we know that 30 years later we would be asked to move to Japan by my employer. And we moved to Tokyo, the big metropolitan area of Tokyo, and immediately realized Tom Orr is still in Japan as a missionary in northern Japan at a university there. So we, of course, immediately reconnected. and we're able to actually go up and visit him, meet the students that he was ministering to and reaching out to. And actually, through our church in Tokyo, we established the connection that Tom was kind of the feeder network, and he had students that were graduating, moving down to Tokyo for jobs, and we were able to take and invite those students to become part of our small group at our apartment in Tokyo, and continue their faith walk, and in several cases actually accept the Lord. And so it's not a coincidence that these events would be separated by 30 years and that we would be brought together half a world away in a ministry together. So throughout our journey, what we've come to learn is that in order to grow your faith, you need to step out in faith.
Hector talked about two major decision points in their life. One was when they were first married, weren't in a church yet, and making a decision about where they were going to send their tithe. And that's just, the regular giving that comes week in and week out. And I want to encourage some of you, when we talk about sacrificial giving, you're just not there yet spiritually. Your relationship with God is not there yet. We talk about God in the car, and he's still in the back seat of your car. And you need to grow, but that's where you are right now. So maybe for some of you, a campaign like this spurs you on to just, for the first time in your life, become a regular giver. Pick a percentage and start giving in that way. But then he also talks about a time when we were going to build this worship center, and their capacity was greater and the maturity was even deeper. And they said, they felt led by God to give in a significant way, sacrificial way. And some of you, God is going to challenge you in that way, because you're surrendered to God and you're going to listen to what he says. And if he says that's what he wants you to do, you're going to do that if he tells you to do that. So wherever you are, I just hope that you take a step forward in experiencing the love of Christ and experiencing the sacrificial love of Christ, so that it flows through you and comes through in everything that you do in your life. And if we do that together and we're praying and asking for God's leading, this thing is going to be truly a piece of cake. It really will be. And it's going to have an impact in the eternity of all kinds of people's lives. So let's pray together.